It looks like some of you and your colleagues have retired from protesting on the street. You didn't particularly join them in this one. Was there a reason why you did not?
Shehu, thank you for having me in your program. Well, first and foremost, we have not retired from activism. And I believe and strongly support those who protested peacefully. Nigeria is a democracy, and everyone has the right to peacefully object, to resist, to disobey, and also to stand for any ideals. And democracy and the laws of our land give you that leverage to do that. But what we have seen in the last few days, it's not a peaceful protest as far as I'm concerned from the northern part of Nigeria. The whole idea was hijacked and the script was changed as far as the north was concerned. Those who called for the protest must have come from Lagos or anywhere, but there were no visible leadership as far as Kano, Jigawa, Kaduna, and all the states that experience violence in the north. It's a fact. Even protest has a rule. The first rule is that there should be reason for which people should protest. Of course, there is hunger, there is hardship, there is suffering as a result of the economic reforms program, which is enough reason for people to protest, but to protest peacefully. But secondly, a protest also needs leadership. When you have leaders who will lead the flock on the street, then certainly one of the responsibility of that leader is to control the crowd and to guide them. We're going to start protests from point A to point B, and we're going to start from 8 a.m. and end by 4 p.m. Now, that was not the case in the north. So from what we have seen, especially in Kaduna State, where I come from, was that people were called out to the street, and then they were left on autopilot. And now young people use the opportunity to launch attack on public infrastructure, snatch motorcycle and phones, molest people, attack banks, and looted public establishments. And then the new dimension to this is what you have just discussed, was that a day before the last protest, money was shared to youths, and then Russian flags was also shared. That shows that the whole intent of the protest is not simply about the policies and programs of the government or objection to removal of subsidy, but there was an attempt to create an atmosphere where there will be an overthrow of the government. And when you have this kind of situation, you will see that there is someone writing a script for anarchy, lawlessness, and disorder. And it is incumbent on people like us to speak. I cannot join a protest that I was not engaged or consulted in the planning stage. And I believe that no one should. If those who believe that the solution to the problem, or there is a need for people to protest, then there should have been consultations. This is not the first time we have protests in Nigeria. And you have seen protests by Labour, protests by ASU, protests by NANS. But protest has a rule. You embark on a day or two protest, and then you suspend it and create room for dialogue. There you table your demands and negotiations take place, and then you achieve some of the objectives and aims of your own protest. But that was not the case here.
Senator, I'd like you to give us a sense, a comparative analysis, how the protests have developed in different dimensions in different parts of the country. It does look like that protest split the country into half, where we saw a different dimension up north and a different dimension down south.
Yeah, one of the fundamental differences between the protests that took place in the north and the ones in the south is that the ones in the south has identifiable leaders. You can say this person now comes on and says, we are organizing a protest tomorrow. And this will be our meeting point, and this is where we're going. But in the whole North, nobody can pinpoint to you specifically who is responsible for the protests in Kaduna, in Jigawa, in Borno, in Kano State. So absence of leadership is one. And when you don't have leaders of protest leading a protest, then you simply have anarchy. How does a peaceful protest metamorphose into a violent one? There are 6 factors to it. The first has to do with perhaps the use of live bullets against peaceful protesters. The second has to do with infiltration of the protesters by thugs. Because thugs sometimes thugs don't need to be sponsored. They take advantage of such procession and then they loot. The third aspect of it has to do with the fact that if there are people with ulterior motives other than the one that were publicly advertised, you'll have violence. The fourth aspect of it is that when protests are sponsored, then it's not an organic procession, it's not an organic process that came from the people. It was designed to create disorder and anarchy in the land. The fourth aspect of it has to do with the fact that when you unleash thugs against peaceful protesters, then you will have violence. In our case here, the symptoms of anarchy and disorder was clear with what you have seen with the flags being displayed. When young people were called out to the street and they don't have anyone to guide them, then they guide themselves. And when mob rules, this is what we have.
But would you say that the protest in some way was politically motivated or sponsored? You said earlier that people were being given money.
Yes.
In the north.
Yes.
But that doesn't look like the case in the south. So I'm looking at a dimension that looks like there is an ethnic difference or regional differences in the manner in which those two the scenarios went. And I'll give you 3 characteristics that differentiated the northern protest and the southern protest. In the north, you saw a quick escalation of violence, such that it came to a point that, in fact, security operatives were now trying to find a way of quelling those violence. Secondly, which you will not see as much of that in the southern part of the country. Secondly, quickly, governors and in about 5 to 7 states declared curfew in some of the northern states. The third is that there are now international dimension into what happened and what we saw in the northern region of the country. How come there is a protest that was announced, but we saw something different in different parts of the country? And there are those who will say, if there are political dimension to it, to what end?
Well, I am happy that you have already been able to identify some of the differences. But I can tell you that the major difference between the southern and northern protests is that people in the north were simply told to come out to protest without leadership coordination to tell them this is what to do. And this is how it ended up.
And those who asked them to come out, yes, they did not come out with them.
They didn't come out with them.
It was a remote and a virtual ordering or control of these people, isn't it?
Yeah. You see, the economic situation in the country has created an atmosphere where people are angry and they are looking for a way to which they can register their anger publicly. And now an opportunity came. But that opportunity was the one that has a hidden motive. There are ulterior motives attached to it. And then they came out to the street. I can tell you many of these young boys who were holding these Russian flags don't know even what that flag was all about. If you are going out for a hunger protest, you should be creative. You can pick up plates, you can pick up spoons and empty pots or raise Nigerian flag. We have seen economic protests in Brazil, in Argentina, and in some countries in Southeast Asia, where you see this kind of creativity. But in the case of the North, there was a deliberate attempt not to achieve the aim of pressurizing government to change its policy, but to overthrowing the whole government, using people who are not sure and don't know they were being used. And this is what we are led to. Before a protest, naturally, there will be a press conference. The leadership of that protest will go and organize a press conference and say, tomorrow, on so date, we are going to have a protest. And we urge on the security to provide all the necessary protection and support that they are supposed to by the provisions of our constitution. But that was not the case. And the violence you see in the north is a bottle of anger, and anger that has generated for decades, and now an opportunity came. And there is a message to this, and there is lesson to learn from this. The millions of young people in northern Nigeria today who have demonstrated by the use of violence that they can go against anything and anyone, a time bomb, not just for the north, but for the whole country. The earlier we do something about endemic poverty and destitution in the north, the better for the country.
And I'm going to ask quickly, because I like you too, because I know you are an advocate of good governance, and you've spoken and picked holes in the manner in which the federating units are being governed. But I like, as a leader of thought in the northern region of the country, I like you to mention, I'm a student of history, and I know the struggle of how our country fought, and those major figures fought to take the reins of power from the boys in khaki. And the fact that at the end of the day, you look at those who have laid their lives down, and some of the consequences of ethnic politics and poisoning the minds of young people to raise ethnic tension in our land. What does this portend, especially what we saw, knowing the political intricacy in our country today? There are those who will say, you've had a northerner govern this country for 80 years, and you have now a southerner who has just got into office just for about a year. But that was not the essence of the protest in the first place. But those who have now caused this mayhem have now raised all of this tension to now make political permutation into what could have been a threat to a legitimate government in power. What does this portend? Should the leaders of the North start rethinking strategies of how we need to keep our nation and the unity of this nation intact?
Well, Mr. Shehu, what I can tell you is that from what I know, if the actions taken by the governor of Kaduna State and government of Kaduna State has not been deep, this country will have been in flames up to this very moment. But consultations were made because Kaduna was the target of these plotters, of this anarchy. Now, it's important as a region, we should not simply use a telescope. We should use a mirror to look at ourselves. Quite rightly, we must hold President Tinubu to account as an elected leader and the president of this country. But the fact remains that he is not the problem, and he is also not the solution to the issues we face in northern Nigeria. The poverty, the illiteracy, the underdevelopment, the extremism and terrorism which we have been facing for over 1 decade now, or 2 or 3 decades, were a product of abject neglect by successive leaders who come from our own part of the country. If you're going to share this blame, I can say that at least Tinubu should take 10% of it. But the bulk of it has to do with leadership that failed to use the opportunity of power to utilize the resources of the region for the benefit of the people of the region. Look at it. The statistics on the number of out-of-school children, the mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, the poverty index, the economic indices have all seen how the North has not just lagged behind, but continuing to lag behind in comparative to what is happening in the southern part of Nigeria. But I have said it continuously that poverty is not an excuse to violence. The people of the North are not poorer than the people of Niger Republic. They're not poorer than the people of Benin Republic. They're not poorer than the people of Chad and northern Cameroon. But poverty was used now as a basis to instigate violence. Now, it is incumbent on the leaders of the North to take lessons from what has happened and to also know the consequences and dangers of doing nothing. They need to come back to drawing board. The governors, political leaders, religious, business, the intellectuals of the region need to converge and address the fundamental issues of poverty and underdevelopment in the region so that this will come to an end.
Senator.
It has been said.
Yeah.
Sometimes the bandits who are killing and kidnapping people are not from Cameroon, they are not from Niger, they are not from Morocco. They are people from the north. The terrorists who are killing people in the northeast are people from the north. So the problems of the north can largely be solved by people from the north. If a northerner was in power, when a northerner was in power for 8 years, and you are patient enough with him, you refuse to hold him to account, and he failed to deliver, there is no better way other than to see that those who come from the north and are still within this government will be able to deliver what we failed to deliver to ourselves when we were in power. So I believe this is what needs to be done.